Hey, true believers. Welcome to another episode of JB Reads Comics for You, brought to you by BaggedBoardedandBoxed.com and the Bill and Frank Eat Pop Culture YouTube channel. I'm your host of the most, JB, and today I'm very excited to review Giant-Size X-Statix #1. I'm going to talk a little bit about the original X-Force/X-Statix series from the early 2000s, Mike Allred and his artwork, and then we'll dig into the review of the comic book itself. Just for a little bit of context, Joe Quesada had been named editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics in the late 1990s. Marvel had just come out of bankruptcy. Industry was struggling mightily with a giant fall-off in sales, and Marvel Comics had frankly been moribund for years. Quesada took a lot of steps to turn the company around. He brought in a lot of outside writers, some of them from Hollywood, like Kevin Smith on the Daredevil Guardian Devil arc, and J. Michael Straczynski, who was a writer on Babylon 5, was brought on to write The Amazing Spider-Man. He also brought in talent from other companies. The context specifically for this book, X-Force has its beginnings in a comic book called The New Mutants, which was the first spin-off of Uncanny X-Men. It was the second ever mutant book in the Marvel Universe. It was originally about Teenage Mutants, not Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, although that was one of the original ideas that gave Eastman and Laird the idea for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was the popularity of New Mutants. Anyway, New Mutants pivoted that book away from its origins to be, if the X-Men were the superhero mutants, then X-Force was more like the mutant SWAT team. They were more militaristic. They were like a Black Ops X team. There's been other iterations of this with the X-Men book since then, but that was sort of the original. Joe Quesada simply just wasn't happy with the direction the book had taken, the quality of the book. So in 2001, he decided to bring in a new writing team in lieu of canceling the book entirely. Peter Milligan is a British writer. He's part of the second British invasion. He had been a writer over in the UK on 2000 AD, writing Judge Dredd comics. He was hired by Karen Berger over at Vertigo in the early 1990s, where he wrote a run on Shade the Changing Man. Quesada hired him based on a pitch to reinvigorate this X-Force book by pivoting from being this paramilitary team of mutants into a team of mutant celebrities. He also brought in Mike Allred. Prior to this, Allred had been known almost entirely for a creator-owned indie comic called Madman that he wrote in the early 1990s. I was a huge Madman fan, so that was actually the original hook for me on this book. What this comic originally was most famous for was the very first issue of the Milligan Allred run was sent to the Comics Code Authority, which is a watchdog of comic books to make sure that they were quote-unquote safe for children. For the most part, Marvel and DC had adhered to this Comics Code Authority for years. It was rejected. Quesada elected to print the book anyway without the Comics Code, and soon afterwards Marvel stopped submitting their books to the Comics Code completely, and instead they created their own internal rating system. Part of the reason why he championed this, even against the Comics Code, was because it was just a really, really great comic book. If you haven't had a chance to read the 2001 to 2004 run on X-Force and X-Statix, I would highly recommend that you do so before jumping into this review, as we'll definitely spoil some stuff from those previous arcs. There's 2 trades under the X-Force brand, and then there's an additional 5 trades under the X-Statix banner. If you haven't had a chance, go out and pick these trades up, and remember where we are in the video here, and come on back once you've read those trades. Milligan, he had a very British sense of humor. He was a satirist. He really wanted to parody superhero comic books and pop culture in general with this X-Statix book. His concept was that if there really were superheroes, they'd be more like celebrities than they would be like Spider-Man. They wouldn't hide in the shadows. They probably wouldn't help people. They would really want to go out and make money, be famous, be like Hollywood actors. This was coming out in an era when reality television was really, really popular in the US, with Survivor, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, The Bachelor, things like that were all really a big, big deal. It was also a very big deal in the UK a lot of those television shows were actually imported from the UK to the US. And since he's from the UK, he had seen the explosion of reality television there and was seeing it happen across the pond here in the US. The way tabloid media coverage, Us Magazine, People Magazine, this is the way superheroes would really be treated. So that was something that he wanted to explore with these X-Statix books. I think X-Statix is one of the most important books that came out in the Marvel revival that happened under Joe Quesada. I really think it's right there with Alias because it's very much its own standalone story arc. It's about 30 issues long, and you don't really have to worry about its context in the larger scheme because most of the X-Statix characters were never reused in subsequent Marvel comics, and we'll get into why that is. I do want to talk a little bit about Mike Allred. He's one of my absolute all-time favorite artists. He, along with Gary Frank, are probably the two artists that are going to get me to go out and buy a comic book, regardless of who's writing on it. Allred has a very specific style. He's a pop artist who draws most of his inspiration from not only 60s and 70s comics from Marvel and DC, also from B movies from that era. Allred's Madman comics are also heavily influenced by 1950s and 60s pop culture, especially B movies from the 50s with these crazy looking robots and aliens and ray guns. I always thought everybody loved Mike Allred, but I've actually come to realize that some people really don't like his artwork. He probably couldn't be your primary artist on something like Batman unless you were doing a sort of throwback Batman story like Batman 66. He's not going to work as an artist on a really dark kind of comic book like Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. He does draw a really fun style. The other thing I really like about Mike Allred is he draws everything. He doesn't do any digital tracing at all. His inspirations are your Jack Kirby's, your Steve Ditko's, and he really wants a comic book to feel like it's a comic book from the 1950s and 60s. One of the raps against Allred is that he tends to draw all of his women looking exactly the same. I can't totally disagree with this, but they're drawn in such a cute, sort of endearing style that doesn't really bother me. They all tend to have this bob haircut like Kristen Bell in the first season of Veronica Mars. His female characters that he's designed all seem to be somewhat akin to Zooey Deschanel in the first couple of seasons of New Girl. That being said, he's been drawing characters like this for close to 30 years now. This is art from one of his Madman comics. This is Madman's primary love interest, Joe. He created You Go Girl for the X-Statix and Liv Moore from the Vertigo iZombie series, and Dawn Greenwood from his run with Dan Slott on the Silver Surfer. I obviously have strong negative feelings about Dan Slott when it comes to his work on Spider-Man. His run on Silver Surfer is pretty excellent. It's kind of like the Marvel Comics version of Doctor Who. It's definitely the best work that Dan Slott's ever done, in part because Mike Allred got to do some really cool sort of Steve Kirby style artwork. Diving back into Giant-Size X-Statix #1, I really hope that you did get a chance to go out and read the original Milligan Allred X-Statix run, but Milligan was pretty ruthless with his characters. In the very first issue, he introduced a new team, a new X-Force team, and then immediately killed almost all of them off except for You Go Girl and the Anarchist, as well as X-Force cameraman Duke. They introduced several new characters: Orphan, Vivisector, Fat, Dead Girl. When issue number 26 of X-Statix, the entire X-Statix team was killed off with the exception of Dead Girl because she's already dead. As to why this comic is coming out in 2019, Marvel is celebrating its 80th anniversary. They are pairing up some of their most famous pairings from the past. And this was originally announced. It seemed like it was going to be part of this Marvel 80th anniversary special. Give those of us who have a lot of nostalgia for this X-Statix team a little bit of fun with Milligan and Allred, who both appear to have a lot of affection for their time writing this book. One of the things I really like about Mike Allred is he does all of his own artwork, including backgrounds. He works with his wife Laura. He does both pencils and inks, and she does all the coloring. So as you can see from the background of this very first page, this battle scene depicting the first version of Milligan and Allred's X-Force team, all of this background would probably be done using digital tracing by most artists nowadays, but Allred actually does all of the background art. He pencils it, he inks it, and it really gives the comic really pops and gives it a real 60s Marvel comic vibe. And Laura is also an excellent colorist. I talked a lot in my review of the original Clone Saga how I didn't think the coloring did Ross Andru any favors. A lot of comics today, I also think that a lot of this digital coloring doesn't do a lot of the artists any favors because the colors tend to be very drab and they don't make the characters pop. This art team of the Allreds really does a great job of making characters pop off the page and seem really fun and interesting. This comic has to do a lot of work, not only to catch you up to speed on what happened to the original X-Statix team, but then to introduce a lot of new characters for this giant-size issue, since the majority of the characters from the original X-Statix are dead. In fact, we are under the impression that almost all of the original characters from X-Statix are dead, but as we're going to find out, that may or may not be the case. This is from the original X-Force number 116, and that original team that was killed off in the first issue. This character front and center is Zeitgeist. You may know him from Deadpool 2, and that's actually the kind of the biggest usage of any of these characters that's occurred since X-Statix was canceled in 2004. I really like You Go Girl because despite what I said before about, Allred drawing all his women characters similarly, which I can't totally disagree with, he generally, with the exception of Madman, which he was also writing himself, been working with different writers, and the women all have very defined personalities because he generally works with really good writers. So You Go Girl is not one of these sort of perfect female characters that tend to populate Marvel Comics nowadays. She's kind of screwed up. She's got a lot of flaws. She's got some alcohol issues. She's obsessed with being a celebrity, as all the X-Statix / X-Force characters are. She's not a manic pixie dream girl at all. And then you have the anarchist Tyke Alakar. He was self-defined as the token black Canadian guy on the team. Reminds me of both South Park and Not Another Teen Movie. A lot of Milligan's humor is actually very similar to South Park humor. He really is indiscriminate in who he'll make fun of. He pretty much is willing to take the piss out of just about anybody. And then you have Dupe, who is this Slimer-looking character who always filmed all the X-Force adventures so they could be put out on pay-per-view. This intro also gives you an idea of the tone of the comic book, which is it's reporting on this X-Statix team that disappeared, but it's also showing you that, again, they were more celebrities than they were superheroes the way we think of comic book superheroes. They were famous for the money, the sex, the scandals, the celebrity, and of course the high body count. The logical extreme of reality TV is seeing people in real situations that are actually dying and fighting each other, and America would be fascinated by this. The world would be fascinated by this. So then we get a chance to see the primary X-Force / X-Statix team. We have Vivisector, who is a gay Wolfman character, and then the Orphan, who was introduced as the new team leader. Anarchist powers, where he had this explosive sweat. You Go Girl was a teleporter, and the Orphan was also known as Mr. Sensitive because he had hypersensitivity, as lampooning the concept behind these super sensitive male characters that were coming out during the Clinton administration and the early Bush administration. But one of the things I've been hearing about this book is it really topical to come out with X-Statix in 2019, or was satire very specific to the early 2000s? And my argument would be no. I think we're just as celebrity obsessed now. It's moved from magazines on the newsstand to internet, but it's really not that different. We have a president who's a former reality star, and we have reality television that's still fairly popular, and celebrity culture that people are still really obsessed with. So I do think there's some topicality to the satire, and there is a broader reason beyond just nostalgia why this book is something they thought was a good idea to bring back for a one-shot in 2019. So our only two surviving members of the original X-Statix team, or at least what we're under the impression of from the last issue, is Dead Girl and Dupe, and they need to get a new team back together and they're going to do a lot of the heavy lifting of this reboot pilot that this issue kind of is for this X-Statix team. One of the plot points that was brought up in the original X-Statix run was that You-Go Girl had a daughter when she was 17. She gave that daughter to her parents so she could go off and become a member of X-Force/X-Statix and become a celebrity. Her daughter was under the impression that You-Go Girl was her sister, when in reality You-Go Girl is actually her mother. And Dead Girl brings You-Go Girl back to life briefly so that she can meet her daughter and reveal to her daughter that she is in fact her mother. And I know that sounds super convoluted and very soapy, but again, that's kind of the idea behind this whole series, is these sort of soapy celebrity characters, and they're very self-absorbed, and they have these ridiculous relationships with each other and these unhealthy relationships with their families. Milligan has to do a lot of work here to not only catch us up on what happened previously, but also introduce these legacy X-Statix characters, most of whom are going to be the offspring in one way or another of the original X-Statix team. You-Go Girl reveals to her daughter that Katie has inherited her teleportation powers, and Dead Girl says that she needs Katie's help in this new team. Katie refuses the call to adventure, as it were, because she's angry that her mother lied to her. But regardless, as if you know anything about mutants in Marvel Comics, they don't really have the choice about whether or not they get their powers. Meanwhile, it turns out that not all of the original members of the X-Statix are actually dead. They don't do a lot of legwork explaining this, and I honestly don't mind. I think, again, these hand waves would be frustrating in a book that was a little more serious, but this has always been a comedic sort of comic book, regardless of the high body count. Despite that high body count, I do get the feeling that Milligan and Allred do have a lot of fond feelings for these characters. I don't think they wanted to bring all of them back as legacy characters, and the other thing we'll see is the legacy characters are almost exactly the same as their parents or original incarnations, and I think it's because they just really, despite killing so many of them off, they actually really like these characters a lot and wanted to bring them back and revisit their voices. Vivisector is actually still alive. He writes postmodern novels. The Orphan is also secretly still alive. The Orphan was always more of the most straight up heroic kind of character in the X-Force/X-Statix series, but even he was not immune to the celebrity and wealth trappings of the book. So I do love this exchange here. Since our lucky escapes, we both have new careers. Miles writes novels that I can't read without getting a migraine, and I'm Guy Smith, the unseen force behind Mr. Sensitive Skin Products. Dead Girl and Dupe sort of give us the main thread of this plot here, is that they need to bring up the numbers for this X-Statix team to face this new and unnamed threat, and so they're going to be reaching out to the younger generation. They've already reached out to You-Go Girl's daughter, and we're going to meet some other heirs to the X-Statix. Anarchist, again, was lampooning these reality television shows that played with identity politics and how they can be weaponized or marketed. If you've ever seen episodes of The Real World, particularly in the early seasons, how race was always made an issue, whether or not it really was one or it was just sort of being played that way by MTV. Milligan's satire really was aimed at everybody, and he was willing to take anybody down a peg. Turns out the anarchist had a son named Mike Allred, son of Tyke. He also secretes explosive sweat. And again, we'll see these sort of stereotypes that come out of reality television where they're talking about why he's perfect for the team. Vivisector says, because he's tough, brave, resourceful. And Dead Girl responds, I mean, he's already got a record deal with Bad Rap Records, and he's designed radical new line of sneakers. Lastly, there was another member of the X-Statix called Fat. He had the power to manipulate his celluloid, use it sort of the way Reed Richards stretches. Dupe had illegally taken a sample from him and created a daughter from his genetics that's now a superheroine known as Fatty. And according to her PR material, for this young woman, Fatty is always a feminist issue, swinging pretty wide with the satire. Meanwhile, Katie is struggling with her newfound mutant powers. She's the audience avatar for thinking a lot of this stuff is ridiculous and needing it explained to her. so that people can provide lots and lots of exposition. She also has this ridiculously dopey boyfriend who's so liberal-minded that he once dated a girl with a Coldplay tattoo, even though he's super into death metal. Katie also serves as our entry into revealing the villains of the piece. They attack her and her boyfriend. Dead Girl shows up to help them out, but she's attacked by the villain known as Hurt John, and I'm sad to say it took me a good 5 minutes to realize why this was funny, but it's pretty funny. Dead Girl fails to save her, and she ends up getting kidnapped by this villainous team that Dead Girl and Dupe are creating, this X-Statix team to fight against. Meanwhile, Mr. Sensitive is feeling all sad bastardy about his lost love, You Go Girl. I really love this entire page because it does really demonstrate Milligan's sense of humor and his understanding of all the tropes that he's both using and hanging a lampshade on at the same time. This sensitive hero who doesn't want to fight because he's lost the love of his life. And Mr. Sensitive says, I know we've got a contract for a 3-hour docudrama, and we still need a third act, but I don't have the strength or courage to do X-Statix again. Not without Edie. And nothing you can say can persuade me otherwise. If Brian Michael Bendis were writing this book, this would be like 6 issues worth of story just to talk Mr. Sensitive or Katie into being superheroes in the first place. Milligan knows he doesn't have enough time for that crap, so he has Dupe talk in his Dupe language that only the X-Statix can understand. Dupe says something in one panel, and Mr. Sensitive gets super serious in the next panel. One of the things I was a little concerned about when I was first reading this was there are a lot of pages in this book that are broken down into 5 and 6 panels, including this page. It's a very busy comic book. It doesn't give Allred a lot of room to do some of his crazier sort of Jack Kirby-like artwork. I was sort of frustrated by that at first, but then I realized that this is the way comic books used to be written, and writers really wanted to keep the reader interested to go out and buy the next comic book. Now, comics are being written with graphic novels in mind, so every arc is 6 issues long. It takes forever to get somewhere. In hindsight, I think it's perfect because this is the way comics should be. They should be more briskly paced, and they should have a lot more action in them so that we have a lot more fun reading them, and we want to go out and buy the next issue of the comic book, not wait until the trade paperback comes out. Katie has actually been kidnapped by the original leader from issue number 116, who was thought to be killed in that issue, of X-Force, Zeitgeist. He is also still alive, conveniently enough. Zeitgeist is gathering a team of evil Dada shock troops for the culture war that lies ahead, and he calls them the Excellent. I'm not quite sure what evil Dada shock troopers means to fight the culture war, but it sounds super fun, and I'm totally on board because that sounds way more fun than whatever the heck is going on in Tom King's Batman right now. So fortunately for Katie, Mr. Sensitive and Vivisector have decided to come out from retirement, and the other 2 legacy characters are willing to take up the mantle of their parents / origin of their genetics and fight with the team, as much for fame and fortune and celebrity as for the actual goodness of their hearts. So they crash in to save her from Zeitgeist. Meanwhile, Dupe is filming everything. It's going back out on pay-per-view, and I do like this panel here. All of the older patrons are sitting around looking at the TV screen. Meanwhile, the younger patrons are less interested. We also get this great aside here in the middle of the battle where Orphan, the team leader, says, Tyke, put a little sweat up there. Give us some cover. I'm Mike, man. I'm Mike. But I guess we all look the same to you, right? Oh, God, as touchy as his old man. Hanging a lampshade on the Orphan can't even tell the difference between this legacy character and his original incarnation. The meaninglessness of a lot of these superheroics is that you have these viewers watching this pay-per-view at home, and Zeitgeist is blasting the new anarchist, and people are clapping. Ostensibly, the bad guy is harming the good guy because they don't really know the difference. They don't know who the good guy or the bad guy is, because the reality is that the X-Statix aren't all that great themselves. The Orphan manages to talk Katie into finally using her special teleportation power. Katie finally answers the call to adventure. She teleports the X-Statix out after, unfortunately, Anarchist 2, the A, has lost his arm in battle. But growing some nice boobs, too. Then she sees her YouTube video, all the positive comments she's got. She remembers how she felt when she saved them. But really, it's, well, with YouTube and TV going crazy and all, the requests for interviews, I begin to get why Edie chased fame, why she became You Go Girl. Who knows, maybe one day I might even be able to think of Edie Sawyer as my mother. And most importantly, at the bottom of the page here, it's not the end, it's to be continued. As it turns out, in 2020, we are going to be getting yet another new version of the X-Statix. Confusingly, it's actually going to be called the Excellent #1, which was the villainous team here. As we saw, obviously the villain survived. X-Statix was lucky to get away. I'm really excited that this isn't the end. This wasn't just a one-shot, and we're going to get more Milligan and Allred working on probably the best thing the two of them have ever done. After X-Statix, Milligan went on to work on Uncanny X-Men. I think he was really kind of hemmed in by the restrictions of writing on such a major book. He left Marvel and went over to DC, where he wrote Justice League Dark, which was pretty good, but didn't really sell very well. There were some rumors that Guillermo del Toro was going to make a movie of it, but nothing ever came of that. And I don't think he's ever had the success that he had with X-Statix initially. Allred, meanwhile, has had success. The Silver Surfer run with Slott didn't sell very well, but it was very well regarded. He also did the art on a Fantastic Four spinoff called the FF, and he, of course, worked on iZombie for about 30 issues. So he's had some success. I think that they really do have an affection for this concept, and secretly, even though they kill them off so frequently, I think they have a real affection for a lot of these characters, which is why they brought them back, or why they brought back new versions of them. As far as Giant-Size X-Statix #1 goes, as you can see, it's got a 5-star review on Comixology. It is a giant-size issue, so you're getting about 175% of story for about the same price that you're getting a standard comic book for. It's about 38 pages of comic for $5, so it's a pretty good deal. If you haven't read the original X-Statix run, you might enjoy it. It does a lot of heavy lifting to catch you up on what happened during that run, but I would definitely, again, if you want to read 30 great comics that still hold up even now, go out and pick up those X-Force X-Statix issues first. So I'm going to give a strong recommend to Giant-Size X-Statix #1. I will say it was almost bittersweet reading this and remembering how good Marvel Comics were in the early 2000s and how exciting it was to read these issues. It was something that felt really new and fresh at the time. And I'm kind of dipping my toe back in the water of new comics right now. And this is one of the first new comics I've read. I'm also dipping into Nick Spencer Amazing Spider-Man run and the Chip Zdarsky Daredevil run. They've both been pretty good as well. But I can certainly say that comics got really, really bad, especially Marvel Comics, in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and I've heard they've been bad recently as well. Got a little wistful reading this, wishing the comics could be like they were in the 2000s. This is a good comic. It's a fun comic. It's a well-written comic, and like anything Mike Allred works on, it's a well-drawn comic. Tell me what you think of this review. Feel free to leave a comment on our YouTube page or over on bagboardedandbox.com. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure you're still subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications so that you can catch up on all of our YouTube videos. And thanks for checking this out.